All right, welcome back to another edition of My Car Guru. I'm going to rag on my wife just a little bit because it is a teachable moment, I think. And it's also, I guess it comes at a time when I need to rethink my feelings about a certain kind of technology. And what I'm talking about is automated driving, the driverless car. I think my wife needs one of those. Not around town, mind you, not in the Tri-Cities, places that she's familiar with. But when it comes to any kind of complicated directions, and when I say complicated, I'm talking about go to the red light, turn right, then take your next left. That's too much. That's excessive information. The eyes have glazed over right after the red light. So yesterday we went to rendezvous with the other grandparents to pick up my grandson. My grandson lived just south of Cincinnati. They drive down to London, Kentucky, and we drive up to London, Kentucky, not England, and meet them and then hand off the kid. Well, this time it was a little bit more complicated because he had to bring me the truck that he just wrecked. It's the 2005 model with 10,000 miles on it. And he did a boo-boo. He trusted somebody who was waving him in front of them to cross in front of them. Never trust a traffic cop in a car if they don't have a badge on. And so waved him into oncoming traffic and he got T-boned. But it was still drivable, but I wanted to fix it. You can imagine why. So he drives that vehicle down, followed by his other grandparents. He's only 16. He doesn't understand why he couldn't drive all the way. Cannon, you just had an accident. You're 16, and you admit that you like to sleep a lot in a car, especially when you're coming to see Nanny and Pop. So no, you're not driving. But he did drive that truck at least halfway. Then I jump in the truck, drive it the rest of the way. Now, it's been slammed in the door, so there is no seal around the passenger side door. It is the most terrible wind noise that you've ever heard. It sounds like a jet taking off. I had enough sense to bring my Apple earbuds, the ones that have noise reduction. I knew that was going to be an issue. He said he had a headache for driving it that far. It was terrible. But anyway, I get in his truck, and Tara, my wife, and Cannon get in my F-150 that has no air leaks. Well, they get on the interstate, start driving. We have to drive about 8 miles, maybe 10 miles before the exit. My wife has been with me. Well, we go every month for the last 13 years, approximately. And so, you would think that she would recognize the turn. No. Nope. So we're going down the road, and I'm getting over because I know I have to turn right. She's staying in the left-hand lane. We're getting near the exit. I just assumed too much, I guess, after all these years. And so she drives right past the exit. I turn off. I pick up my phone. I say, honey, yeah? Where are you going? Oh, where are you? I said, well, I turned off where we were supposed to turn off. I don't know where you're going. She said, oh, well, can I make a U-turn? I said, well, no, not on the interstate, but you can go up down to the next exit, which ended up being about 3 or 4 miles on down the road. And I said, then make a U-turn, come back up the interstate to this exit, and then we'll be back together again. She said, okay. So I go over and I get to the Pilot gas station. I'm sitting there waiting, and I'm watching her because I've got this app on my phone where it's called Find My iPhone, and so you can find your family. And I'm watching her, and I see her get off the interstate. Now, folks, you already know which way she has to turn to make a U-turn and come back, right? Yes, she has to turn left. What's she do? She turns right. And she's just heading out in the country somewhere in eastern Kentucky. So I call her again. I say, honey, yeah, where are you going? She said, is this not the right direction? I said, no, you need to make another U-turn. And she said, well, we were just talking and having the best time. And I said, that's fine, but we need to get back to Greenville. So why don't you just make a U-turn, then make a left turn at the interstate, and then come to the next exit and turn right, and I'll be sitting there waiting on you. And I said, Cannon, did you hear that? He said, yes, Pop, I heard it. I thought we were going the wrong way. Well, you need to help your nanny. You need to be a little bit more helpful with the directions. So that's all I'm going to say, except to say this. Maybe the self-driving car is not a bad idea for certain people. I'll take my first break. I'll be back in 1 minute. So yesterday was an eventful day. I was supposed to be attending my son's memorial golf tournament, and it's for a great cause. They raise money for an adult daycare center. It's such a wonderful concept. It's for folks who have, just seniors living in their house. They're not so bad that they need to be in a nursing home, but they got to have somebody to take care of, and then people just, that's expensive. And so it's called ALPS, Adult Day Services. And my wife and I were on the board for a while, and so they wanted to know ways to make money. And so I said, what about a golf tournament? I've done very well with golf tournaments. They said, okay, we'll have a golf tournament. So we had our first golf tournament, very poorly attended. It was just, for adult day services and stuff, and there was just no hook to it. And my son was a big golfer and just loved the game. And I knew that if we were to do something in his name with all the people that knew him and all my relatives and so forth, there'd be no problem filling up the golf tournament. So we called it the Blaine Lawson Memorial Golf Tournament. And they shattered their records. Had really good luck, but yesterday had a really good tournament lined up. And, of course, what's been going on in East Tennessee is evident to everyone that lives here. Lots of rain. And it rained us out. Well, after the initial discussion about whether to cancel it or not, which we decided to cancel it and move it to July 10th, just in case you want to play in it. So we were having this discussion. All of a sudden, my phone started ringing. And I looked at it, and I got done with that conversation, took the other phone. It was 865 area code. And I said, hello? And I didn't recognize the voice, but it was a fraternity brother. And he had brought 3 of my other fraternity brothers with him from Knoxville. I haven't seen these guys in 47 years. And here they are. One of them, or maybe more, had seen me on Facebook, but they had no idea how to get in touch and stuff, so they called the dealership. They did all this stuff behind the scenes. I had no idea they were coming. As soon as he said who he was, I got this big lump in my throat. I couldn't believe it. The tournament's rained out. But you know what? That was a blessing. Because if the tournament had not been rained out, I might have talked to him for 15, 20 minutes, and then everybody head off to the golf course. But because it got rained out, we were able to meet at the dealership. We sat down, had a great time, reconnected, took pictures. I took him to an old country restaurant for breakfast. We had country ham and eggs and biscuits, just exactly what people our age should not be eating. But we woofed it down and had a great conversation. Still pouring rain outside. We knew that it was a good decision to cancel the tournament. But the beauty of that was just the time, the reconnecting. And a couple of them, they knew I was in the car business. I mean, in 1978, when I graduated from UT, they knew what I was going to do. They knew my dad had a Chevy dealership. But, I never sold any of these guys a car. Well, there's one guy that I had, and he was the one from Greenville, but he didn't count in the 4 that came up from Knoxville. And they came from Clarksville, Tennessee, Franklin, Tennessee, drove all the way to Greenville for this. That just touches you in the heart, or touches me, and I appreciate it so much. But now, I was telling them about this podcast, and I was telling them about, the radio show, and they said, well, how often do you do that, once a month or so? I said, no, I do it every day. Every day? What do you talk about every day? And I said, well, it's kind of morphed. I don't just talk about cars. I don't just talk about business, and I don't just talk about life. I talk about all of them. And it seems to be well received for the most part. So they're all excited. They now have a car guy that they can call, and you do too. And one of the things that I put out my personal cell phone number out there. I know a lot of people don't believe that, but it's true. And my email, And there's a lot of people that have questions about car buying, selling, trading, servicing. They have service issues. They wreck a car, just like my grandson. You get hit in the door. What do you do? Where do you go? Who can you trust? Not a lot of people. Unfortunately, there are more hoodlums in this business than good ones. And that's unfortunate. And why is that, though? A lot of people ask me that, and I said, I just don't know. I can't tell you. I think, especially in the sales department, when it comes to salespeople, there's just not a lot of people that want to do that. And they don't have confidence starting a month and have no idea what they're going to make. People like consistency, right? They like a nice steady paycheck, something that they can cover their bills with, maybe have a little bit left over, be able to go on vacation, have a nice Christmas, maybe buy a boat. That's what they want. And I understand that. I get it. But one thing I have a hard time convincing people, I have a hard time convincing some folks, is that you can make an outstanding living in the car business, but you have to get in a groove. You have to develop your own following, your own business. It's a business within a business. The people that buy into that, in the new car and used car sales business, they're the ones that thrive. They're the ones that make $100,000, $150,000, some $200,000 a year, some even more than that. I'd say the average salesperson in the Tri-Cities probably makes around $80,000, $85,000 a year. That's not bad money. But I've had so many people that apply for jobs. They said, my mom always said I could sell cars. I'm a good talker. They think that's it. They think that the solution to making money in sales is to be a good talker. And it's really not. You need to take the talking part out. It's being a conversationalist. It's being able to relate to other human beings. There's certain human skills that have to be in place in order for you to be a successful salesperson, especially when you're selling big ticket items. But how do the bandits make it? Well, if you're willing to break the rules, if you're willing to cheat, if you're willing to lie, you can mislead a lot of people because they don't know that they're being misled. They're not dumb. They're just ignorant. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Can you say ignorant without being negative? I think you can. I'm ignorant of a lot of things. My brother's a cardiologist. I wouldn't attempt that. If I walked in, I don't know where the veins are and all that stuff. I'm ignorant about how that stuff is done. I'm not ignorant about the car business. And that's why I'm valuable to you, to the individual who is trying to make a decision. Because if you don't have a lot of experience doing this, if you're a rookie car buyer, you bought a new car, you wrecked it, you don't know where to go, all of these types of issues about financing, about credit applications. They asked me, how can you talk about cars that often? I said, I'm not just talking about cars. Think about all the things that are involved in your car life. Think about how important your car is to your life in general. Think about how often you have to get it serviced, things that can happen, how you go out and buy a new vehicle and not get your head ripped off, because you pay too much and you're not paying attention to the right things. It's not rocket science, but there is a science to it. I was telling my fraternity brothers about a phone call that I got, and it was pretty late in the evening. I was sitting in my man chair at the house, and who knows what I was watching, but my phone rings, and it's a Texas area code. And at that time of night, I didn't know whether I wanted to answer it, but I went ahead and did. And it's this young man, and he's sitting in a Toyota dealership trying to buy a Toyota Tacoma. And he said, "Is this Mr. Lawson?" And I said, "Yes, it is." "The car guru?" I said, "Yes, the one and the same. How can I help you?" And he said, "Well, I'm in this Toyota dealership, and they've given me a price, and it's actually, when I looked at the window sticker, it's a whole lot more than what the window sticker is. And what do I need to do about that?" I said, "Well, okay, first let me shift gears a little bit because I got my mind on this Netflix movie. Hold, please." No, I didn't say that. But I did have my mind somewhere else. It is hard to shift gears sometimes, especially when it's kind of a complicated question. I said, "Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. Have you driven the vehicle?" No. Okay, that's your first mistake. Have you done any research on pricing? Like, are other dealers charging more than window sticker for Tacomas? Well, no, really haven't done that either. Okay, so my number one thing to you, or my number one suggestion to you, would be to excuse yourself. I mean, I wouldn't like sneak out the back door or whatever, but I'd tell them you need to kind of think about where you are and what you're doing. You need to leave. Really? I really want this truck. Well, I get that. Do you really want to pay too much for the truck? No? Okay. So he agreed. He left. And they literally wore him out on the phone. As soon as he got in the car, the calls started, trying to get him to come back into the dealership. They wanted to make that sale. And he called me back, and I said, don't fall for that. Go home. Send me the VIN number of the vehicle that you're looking at. I'll do some research on it. Send me the VIN on your trade. Tell me the miles, how it's equipped, and so forth. And let's go back at this tomorrow. Just relax, okay? There is no hurry. There's no urgency. Don't create any urgency. That's my message to people lots of times. Don't create urgency when there is no need for urgency. Now, where's the urgency? It's on the dealership's part. They want to sell a car, and they want to sell it today. They want to sell it while you're here. But that's not what your agenda needs to be. Your agenda needs to be gather information, especially the first time you go into the dealership. So keep the emotion out of it and be prepared. So we went and did all the information. I did a Carfax. I did an auto check. I checked his trade-in. He'd had an accident. And that was going to cost him a little bit of money. I asked him if he had pictures of it, like I always recommend. He said, no, I don't have any pictures. Do you have a copy of the estimate or anything? No, I threw all that away. He didn't have anything. So on the Carfax report, it just shows collision. And so the first thing that pops in the dealer's mind is that it's been hit hard. And that's going to make it harder for him to sell it. So that drops the appraisal. I said, you got to be prepared for that. See if you can call your insurance agent and get a copy of that estimate. Because I think he hit a dog or something. It was nothing. And that could make a couple $1,000 difference in what he gets for his trade-in. So I told him that. I said, let's do some research on the one you're buying. I found one just like it at a Toyota dealership in Johnson City. I found out what the invoice price was. Now, in Texas, at that time, you couldn't buy one for invoice. They were all going for MSRP. And that's what I told him. I said, if you can buy it for MSRP, that's a pretty good deal. I mean, as far as things, as long as they don't add anything to it. How much is their processing fee? I don't know. Well, do they have any other charges? Yeah, there's another sticker here, some type of a protection package. I said, all of that is negotiable. Now, they may not sell it to you without the protection package, but you might be able to get them to discount it. What you always have to be willing to do, folks, is walk out the door. That is your power for negotiation. They don't want to hear you say, well, I need to go home and think about it. Because what they're going to say in a really sophisticated way or a crude way, what do you want to think about? And really, that's not their concern. They're trying to find an objection that they can overcome. Just what if you said, well, I really like that thing, but I don't like the color. They're going to say, well, what is it about the color that you don't like? Well, I just never really wanted a white car. Well, sir, I understand how you feel. I felt the same way until I found out that white is one of the best colors to buy. Why is that? Because of the resale value of white, because it doesn't show dents and dings. If you have if you're in an accident, the paint's easy to match, unless it's that pearl white color. There's a lot of reasons why white is such a great color, sir. Do you think if the price was good enough that you could forget about the color and just go ahead and take this car? This is what they're going to say. And you got to be prepared for it. No, I'm still going to go home and think about it. Appreciate it, though. And then go home. And think about it. Or call a guru. 423-552-2020. And we'll navigate this thing together. I'll see you in a minute. You ever heard I think it's a Chinese phrase, yin and yang? I looked it up. It says it's a concept from Chinese philosophy that describes how seemingly opposite forces are interconnected and interdependent in a natural world. And I think it relates to the opposing forces of a salesperson and a customer on a car lot. because the salesperson is using his skill set to try to convince you to buy a vehicle. You should be using your skill set to resist making a bad decision, not being forced or feeling like you're forced. I mean, I've heard it so many times I can't even count, of somebody coming in, they bought a car from somebody else, they want to get out of it, and they say, I just can't believe I bought this thing. I felt so much pressure. They just wouldn't let me leave. That is just not true. And it's not just the car business. This could happen when you're buying a mattress. I think a lot of those people used to sell cars. And furniture salespeople are the same way. Maybe in some people in real estate. But however, I have seen some people that were in the car business. They make great real estate agents. The only problem is, they don't get to practice their skills as often as you do as a salesperson, unless you're a real busy real estate agent. But it's all about features and benefits, explaining those features and benefits, and getting the customer to see that the value of what you're selling is greater than the cost. And that's all that they're trying to do, except some of them use lies and deception in order to get there. And I think the key for a consumer is keep your antenna up. Look for these things that I talk about. And keep your enthusiasm under control. Don't get too excited, because that's when you're going to make a bad decision. Buying a car is a big deal, because the average selling price of a car today is $49,000. Even used cars, junky used cars, are expensive. So it's easy to make a bad buying decision. But I'd rather pay full window sticker or over window sticker for something that I really, really want and will enjoy and will drive for a long time. Wouldn't you? I mean, I don't want to pay that much for something, but I would rather do that than pay a bunch of money and get a great, huge discount on something that I'm going to hate and going to wish I never bought a year from now. So there's a couple things. Always take a test drive, folks. Oh, I don't need to drive it. It's a new car. No, you need to drive it. You may not be able to see out of it. It may be harder than you think to get in and out of. Maybe the controls are laid out really funky. Maybe you'll never get used to that new kind of dial that they use. Like Ford uses that a lot now. Instead of a gear shift, they have this little knob that you turn. I didn't like it at first, but I'm used to it, and it's fine. My only problem is that it's electronic. There's nothing connected to my transmission but a wire. But that's the way it's going to be. Everything's going to be connected by wire. Maybe brain waves in a few years. Who knows? Well, thanks for listening to this edition of My Car Guru. Take advantage of me. Abuse me. 423-552-2020 or LennyLawson2020 @gmail.com. And I'll see you on the next edition of My Car Guru.